being here. I'm Rebecca Karcher. Jenna Altmeyer, my colleague, and I are working on this speaker series together, so thank you for being here. We're hoping that all of us learn a little bit more about some of the folks in our community that we don't live next door to, maybe, or maybe we do. Our first speaker and guinea pig today is Cameron Shackelford. Cameron oversees the Safe Place program with the YMCA Youth Service Bureau, and he spoke a little bit about human trafficking in a meeting where I was one time, and for me, even though I'm very worldly, I had no idea that human trafficking was something that we experience right here in Fort Wayne, and I certainly didn't understand that we experience it in populations that Cameron was describing. So he has agreed to chat with us today, and I know that he'll be open to conversation, communication, questions. Oh, and
please note, everybody please note that Trinity is a designated safe place, and we've had the privilege of working with Cameron just a little bit before that. So, I mean, just so that you know, your church fits into some of the stuff that that is the answer to some of this.
Yeah, so like they said, I appreciate you guys for having me. I am in charge of the YMCA's Safe Place program. It's a 24/7 crisis line for youth. Umbrellaed over the Youth Service Bureau part of our organization is the Indiana Youth Service Association. And within that association, there's a bunch of other services that we provide. So community education is one of them. So that's what this presentation is kind of going to be around, is the human trafficking aspect of the youth work that we do. You're probably asking yourselves, why are we talking about human trafficking? Not in my backyard. This doesn't happen here, but it definitely does. And the great thing about this presentation compared to something you would find on the internet or online is that this is Indiana focused. So there's two entities that have poured into this curriculum for us. It's the Indiana Criminal Justice Institute, as well as the Indiana Trafficking Victims Assistance Program. And then one side one is the Indiana Protection Against Trafficked Humans. That's another one that they kind of help with our youth curriculum, where I actually go into the schools and talk about the grooming process. Anyway, I'm just here to talk about human trafficking, but we do a whole slew of other things. So if you have any questions about that, I'll be open to answering. So any questions so far? No? All right. So again, that's me, part of the YMCA's Youth Service Bureau. Okay, so getting into it. So the Indiana Youth Service Association, that's the one that the YMCA's Youth Service Bureau is umbrellaed under. That's how we're connected to this curriculum. And then those are the 4 pillars of the Indiana Youth Service Association. So there's people like me all over the state educating people about human trafficking. This is a state curriculum, so I can't deviate too much off of what we do, but I do add a lot of my personal experience in working with people who are trafficking survivors, and how it does happen here. So we'll get into it. Okay, so some of the objectives today is we're going to identify what human trafficking, that definition, what that is. When people say human trafficking, there's this sensational response to it, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe people are being kidnapped, taken overseas, things like that. We're going to define it because a lot of people's definitions isn't really accurate to what it truly is. We're going to outline some key components for the action, means, and purpose model. We'll get into that. That's something that helps us identify if this is a trafficking or not, so that you yourself will be armed with the ability to kind of see if you can give in a tip or not. Identify youth populations that are most vulnerable to human trafficking, so you'll know some of the vulnerable populations. So when I was working on our 24/7 crisis line and we had a call here at the church, I was able to use those red flags to identify that person that had some experience who was dealing with surviving trafficking. So those red flags come in handy. Another thing is a list of common red flags. Talked a little bit about that. Know what to do after identifying a suspected victim of trafficking or sexual exploitation. So we'll give you guys some numbers and some people to call in case there ever is a situation that is kind of just, getting to your gut, like, I think this something feels off about this situation, right? And then we'll also explain ways in which the Indiana Trafficking Victims Assistance Program can support your agency. So if there's more community ed, you receive this and you're like, okay, I'm a part of another association or another group that I really think needs to hear this information. We can exchange information and we can figure out how we can give this presentation to you as well. So we're gonna watch a quick video.
My trafficker was my husband. There was no way I could reach out to anybody for help.
We're scared. We're scared to run. We're scared to tell anybody what's going on.
It was an incredibly violent situation. I felt like there was no way I could get out.
Human traffickers can be just about anyone from any walk of life. A lot of the trafficking involves domestic servitude, hoteliers, restaurant owners, owners of massage parlors, agricultural farm owners.
There can be a trafficker who tells a woman, I want to be your boyfriend, I love you, and if you love me, you're going to go out and have sex for money. It can be kind of psychological like that, or it can be more overt, more physical. It can be hitting, abusing, keeping them away from any support systems.
Trafficking, it doesn't know any boundaries. The victim can be male, female, transgendered, anyone. And it happens all over America.
I still see this attitude of it's just immigrants or it's just people in other countries. It happens to U.S. citizens so much more than people are aware.
So what is trafficking? If anybody wants to share like what you've heard about trafficking and maybe some of the myths that were dispelled in that video, or any comments on the video about trafficking, does anybody want to share?
Were any of those people from Indiana?
I don't believe so.
So I can still think it happens other places?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, but we'll get into some real.
You just hear a lot, like around the time of the Super Bowl, of
Yeah.
wherever the Super Bowl is,
Yep.
that people are snatching people and bringing particularly young girls
Yeah.
in to service the people that are there at the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's one.
And so it kind of is in waves as to when it gets attention into the media,
Mhm.
but around Super Bowl time, you hear a lot.
Yeah, Super Bowl time, there is a large amount of trafficking activity. It's just how that is done is maybe a little different, and we'll talk about that in the presentation. Yeah. Any other things?
A perception would be that it's young girls that run away, go to New York City, and end up in a situation.
Yeah, yeah, that is true. You got to go to a big city in order to be trafficked, things like that. Yeah. Okay. So we'll get into what that definition actually is. So this is a long definition. A lot of the times people are like, oh my gosh, why does it have to be so specific? It's like legal jargon. But this encompasses all the ways that we understand trafficking because it is a diverse field of criminal activity. The things that they do and the ways that they do it are different. That's why we broke it down to the action means purpose model. And in this, you'll see those red highlighted words: force, threat of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into any form of work or service against their will. So that's general. That opens up that human trafficking definition because the work is so diverse. It looks different depending on what region, what type of trafficking, what type of place you're in. So in Indiana, we'll get into some specifics, but the action means and purpose model is what a lot of the criminal justice will use to persecute or find out if this is trafficking. So there's different actions in here. So if anybody is doing these things, so they all have to be connected for the purpose of labor or services or commercial sexual conduct. So the actions could include somebody who recruits. So maybe they don't necessarily harbor or take any girls, but they can be a part of the recruitment piece where, and it's not just girls, it's trafficking survivors. They can go in and talk to somebody and persuade them and tell them like, this is the life you can live. Somebody who harbors them. So you may have the space in which you're keeping people who are being trafficked. Somebody who transports takes somebody to a secondary location in order for them to receive either the labor services or the commercial sexual conduct. Somebody who provides it, obtains, patronizes, and solicits. So that's all included in trafficking. When we think trafficking, we think it's this shadowy figure that is just one person pulling the puppet strings, right? But there's so much more to what trafficking is. And in order to hold people accountable, we need all of that in the actions, right? So that people aren't participating in the patronization of trafficking. So by what means are they doing this? How are they getting people to, or how are they compelling them to be a part of the trafficking industry? So we've got force. That's the most common, not the most common, but that's the most common when people think of, when they think of trafficking. They're thinking chains, they're thinking people are locked in somebody's basement. Probably the lowest population of people who are trafficked, right? Fraud. So this could be somebody who has a front modeling agency that says, hey, if you want to model for me, we can fly you out here. You can, we'll pay for everything. You come out here, you work for us. Or it could be a fake business that has, hey, we have a serving job. You work out here, we'll pay for your living expenses. What the person doesn't know is that those living expenses come out of their wages and then they're working for free labor. This is also very common on like farmlands, things like that for migrant workers. Coercion. That's any way of trickery that they could kind of get somebody into it. So a lot of times that includes the threat of force. So maybe there is no real force. Nobody's been hit, but you're talking to a child. That coercion piece is easier to convey to a child because of the power dynamic between an adult and the child, right? And then the purpose, it's either the labor trafficking or the sex trafficking. So those are the two different trafficking aspects that we're going to talk about today. We're probably going to focus more on sex trafficking because labor trafficking is a whole other, the ins and outs of that, that's a whole other presentation. So breaking down force, fraud, or coercion, so I kind of went over some of these. So the force part, we got beating, slapping, burning. So burning would be something like branding. If you're branded as somebody, so-and-so's girls or boys, they understand that that's that person's property, so you can't move in on their territory. You become a product or an object. When I do presentations with kids, we try to get them out of the mindset of thinking about women as objects or things to accomplish, or even sex as something as a means to that, right? Because that's what helps keep the sex trafficking industry at large. So burning, sexual assault, rape or gang rape. So a lot of the force stuff is common in a lot of gang trafficking. We see that happens with that. Confinement, initiation, torture practices. So there's something in the trafficking industry that they call breaking in somebody, is when they do one of those things, whether it be gang rape or torture. Humiliation's another one. So that's just the most common one that people think of. When we move towards fraud, fraud and coercion, those are the ones that get tricky and it's harder to prove. So false promises, deceitful enticement, withholding wages, that's more for labor trafficking, blackmail or extortion. So after the pandemic, we saw an influx of people utilizing commercial sexual conduct online. And by means of doing that is blackmail or extortion by keeping nude photos of somebody that they thought they were sending to somebody that they trusted. And they use those against them, say, hey, I'll send them to your mom, I'll send them to your family, or I have a whole page dedicated to your nude photos, and if you don't give me this, or if you don't send me more photos, they'll be leaked online. So that's one thing. Lying about work conditions. So it's kind of like that example I talked about for the restaurant. Your work conditions and your living expenses, they'll have a picture on the internet that says, you'll be living here, while you also get to do your tip job. And then whenever you're done doing the wages, like the server thing, you can go out and live a life of lavish and do whatever you want with your money. But when they go to that specific business, they find out that's not necessarily the case. And then preying on desperation. So the population I work with is primarily homeless youth. And a lot of them are in a desperate situation. And so we call survival sex is when they exchange sex for a place to stay. And a lot of times that can be led on more into trafficking. So there's a lot of situations, and like 9 times out of 10, if I have a kid that says, oh, I have a friend from high school that's like really nice, we've always been friends and I'm just gonna stay with them, it's always a red flag for me, because I know 9 times out of 10, they will be propositioned. And then I get a call in the middle of the night, they want me to do some weird stuff, I don't wanna do it, so we have to figure something else out. So I try not to lean on friends with the kids that I work with, because it's never good. So we also have coercion. So threats of serious harm. So this doesn't have to be just threats of serious harm to that specific person who is this survivor of trafficking. It could be, hey, if you don't do what I say, I'm gonna get your family member, whether it be your sister, your brother, to do this instead. So a lot of people will do it to protect their family or their siblings. And I'm saying all of this and giving examples that are kind of graphic only because when we get to what trafficking actually is, a lot of the times when you're working with this population, it's like, why didn't you just leave? And this is why. So if we can prove force, fraud, or coercion, then we can show that this person enticed them or compelled them through these means in order to get them into either this commercial sex industry or labor. Any questions so far? I'm going kind of fast. I just had an energy drink. No questions so far? Yeah, so.
Cameron, I thought you said no to energy drinks.
Probably. I'm not allowed to have them. My wife can't know. So there's intimidation, goes along with the threats of serious harm. Humiliation, like I talked about last time. Emotional abuse. So there's like, I don't know if you guys saw in that last video that I showed, the cycle of abuse was on there, and it's a lot to do with power dynamics. And what you'll learn through this presentation is that trafficking is a very methodical practice. It's one of the oldest practices that's been going on since the biblical era. So when we look at this, there's a lot of history to it. So there's a lot of things that are ritualistically put in place that a lot of these traffickers or pimps know what to do, so that it's intentional. So these people don't know what hits them before it happens. The controlling of the daily life skills. Establishing quotas, that's another big one. If you know you have to meet a certain quota, you're going to work to get that done. And a lot of times these quotas are so far out of like impossibility that they end up never working to that ability to get their freedom. And then also just a climate of fear. So again, not a lot of people are probably abused, but they've seen it. There's a climate of fear. You're always feeling like you're walking on eggshells. Traffickers like to have that because then they have the upper hand. If you're always wondering what they're going to do, you don't know what you can do, and you don't have time to think about your freedom. Okay. So for this is the 2 different ones that we talked about. So we talked about labor, which is the purpose, or the commercial sexual conduct, right? So sex trafficking, this is the individual definitions for each of the 2 different types of trafficking. Sex trafficking, the recruiting, harboring, transporting, provisions, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting, so that's those actions, right? Of a person for the purpose of commercial sex act, in which the commercial sex act is included by fraud, force, or coercion. Again, that lingo is going to be there constantly. In which a person is induced to perform such an act as under the age of 18. So that's something specific to Indiana. So Indiana is actually one of the states that is ahead of the game when it comes to prosecuting people who are sex trafficked. So in other states, there's a thing called teen prostitution, whereas here in Indiana, we don't have that. We're not criminalizing our people who were, played a victim. They're children, right? So we're not treating them as if they committed an offense, because if a kid is ever put in that position, we're wondering, okay, so how did they get there? So Indiana's ahead of the game where kids don't get in trouble, we immediately go to the trafficker. So we want people to be able to be identified so that they can come out and receive help. A lot of times kids in other places don't have that luxury because they can get in trouble for, prostitution or teen prostitution. So things like that. Labor trafficking is Again, those actions means purpose, and you guys can read that and I can send something out so you guys have those definitions. But this is just to show that that language of the action, means, and purpose model is placed into those definitions so that you can easily identify them. Any questions, Marcus?
So, in the first instance, that there's a legal definition there, there's statutory wording there, but would it be true also to say that you could take under 18 out and still have sex trafficking?
Yes, that is correct. But in that aspect, you have to prove fraud, force, or coercion. Thank you for that clarification, because that's the difference. You don't necessarily have to prove fraud, force, or coercion if they are under the age of 18, but if they are over the age of 18, you have to show how they got into that specific situation. You have to figure out how were they compelled, what did they tell you, things like that. Then you have to do more in your forensic interview, things like that. Good question. Any other? Okay. So this is the IC codes for a lot of these. These can include, again, the actions to make it more diverse, to include all people who are involved in all types of trafficking. We've got the promotion of human sexual trafficking, promotion of human labor trafficking, child sexual trafficking, not the promotion, but just child sexual trafficking, and then human trafficking applicable to all buyers, so people who are obtaining those services. You have a question? Oh. Human trafficking of a minor is considered child abuse in Indiana. So in Indiana, we have the great pleasure of people being educated because of initiatives like the IYSA or in the Indiana Trafficking Victims Assistance Program. Because people are educated, we now understand what questions to ask when somebody's in a iffy situation, right? Because they're trained not to speak out and they're always being mobile. So it's hard to kind of get a full story of what a kid or somebody who is in a trafficking situation is in. Okay. So yeah, I kind of talked about that, individuals under the age of 18. And again, that's just for sex trafficking. Labor trafficking, that's another story. The age of 18, you still need to prove fraud, force, or coercion when it's labor trafficking. Doesn't necessarily it just applies to the sex trafficking piece. Any questions? These are the definitions. Again, you'll see that legal jargon where it says fraud, force, or coercion. So the physical harm, physical restraining, again, that relates again to those actions so that we have better proof of what's going on and we can identify people who are indeed dealing with trafficking. Okay, so these are the industries that are vulnerable to trafficking. So before we get into that actual slide, what are some industries that you can already, based off of the language and some of the things that I'm saying, what industries or like businesses do you guys think would include trafficking? And some of them are said in the video too. Anybody want to shoot some guesses?
Massage parlors?
Yep.
Modeling agencies.
Modeling agencies, yep.
Hotels.
Hotels. You guys are in sync. What?
Carnivals.
Carnivals. I don't know if that one's on there, but that would be a good one.
Town to town.
Yeah, town to town.
Dating services.
Dating services, yeah. That's probably something more new because, the rise of online stuff. So I'm going to...
Social media.
Social media, yeah. What would you say?
Gas stations.
Gas stations.
If they're homeless, they'll go to a gas station by the fast food place.
Yeah.
And those are known spots for pickups.
Yeah. So really any business can be a front for trafficking. These are some of the ones that we identified. So any domestic work, so like two people mentioned hotel work, hospitality, massage parlors, restaurants, anything involving in the sex industry. So things like strip clubs as well. There's actually a lot of a synergistic relationship between hotels, strip clubs, and then truck stops. Now, it's not anything to do with trucking, but a lot of the trafficking is in the lingo of truckers. So like things that they would call some people who are survivors of trafficking lot lizards, things like that. That relationship helps that business thrive. You never get the same clientele. People are coming through in and out. Nobody knows each other's names. It's very discreet. Health and beauty, social services. So that one's always how would social services be involved? So a lot of people sometimes may be posing as somebody who's willing to help, but the access to kids is what gives them the ability, and vulnerable kids at that, the ability to traffic. Forestry, agriculture, and then door-to-door sales. So that's a lot of the labor trafficking incidents. Yeah, and it doesn't mean all, but it's where they can work. Yeah. So does it really happen here? I'm about to show. I'll just show it. This is a map done by the Polaris Project. The Polaris Project, this is where we pulled a lot of data from. They do a lot of trafficking research. If you guys see Fort Wayne, we have yeah, right? We're actually right here, red dot. So it's a heat map. So the red areas are going to be the areas where we see a lot of trafficking. And then the kind of blue areas is they're still trafficking, but not a lot. So Fort Wayne's right there, and we have our own dot. And so people are like, well, I just can't believe that it happens here. But a lot of research is done through the tip lines that we have, and we'll give you guys the numbers too, that showcase we get a lot of activity in this area. And mainly because if you look, we're surrounded by a lot of activity, right? And there's a lot of ability to go to bigger markets like Indianapolis, Cleveland, Michigan, and Detroit, and Chicago.
I lived right in the middle of Kansas where there's some activity there, and there was a lot of drug use because I-70 and I-35 crossed. And the highway traffic, it made it easier for people to get in, do a drop, and go. So I assume that's kind of it.
Yeah, yeah. We're the crossroads of America.
Yes, exactly.
Three Rivers, yeah.
Crossroads of America.
Crossroads of America.
I worked for the Chamber of Commerce for a while, and that was a selling point.
Yes.
Yeah. Location, 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 right? So yeah. But it works in other industries as well. And we see for the criminal industry, it works for them as well. They can go to bigger markets and make more money and then come back here, remain anonymous, move in and out of different places and have different contacts in all of these areas that are nearby. So it does happen here, and it's proven by the data show by Polaris Project. So over the years of doing the education, the National Human Trafficking Hotline in Indiana specifically, the more tips we see, the more cases we see identified. So by you guys sitting in this presentation and learning about this, we can identify more people who are involved in trafficking. So the service partners have served over 730 trafficked, sexually exploited, and high-risk youth from October 2015 to July 2019. So we see the more education we do, the better we get people who are survivors of trafficking identified. So in blue is the hotline calls. So there's always going to be more hotline calls than there are cases identified because it's hard to prove. But with you guys being armed with the information, you guys can make a difference, and we see that people are making a difference. So calling out to us, utilizing the 24/7 crisis line for youth, we can get people help.
So what is the difference between hotline calls and cases reported?
So yeah. So the hotline call is just like you called in a tip. Hey, I noticed this person is, with a younger person and they are not given the right to speak a lot of the times, but there's a lot of questions I have as a teacher. They have bruises, they have and we'll get into the red flags. They've identified those 3 or more red flags, and they just call in that tip, whether it be anonymous or not. So then the cops do the investigation, they go in and they look at stuff, and then whether or not they identify a case is up to how much information they have.
Law enforcement actually doing that case.
Yep, yep.
So do you think the actual prevalence of trafficking, to look at that chart, do you think if that could go back to the year 2000, for example, would the actual prevalence of trafficking also decrease back to 2000?
No. Well, I mean, if we're looking at the actual prevalence of trafficking, I would say it's more, right? But
So it's more, it's just not reported.
Exactly, exactly. So the more people we see that understand this information, that understand what trafficking really looks like, we get more people identified. And so, you know, they're having to be smarter about their business because we are now armed with that information and that awareness. But yeah, this stuff has been going on forever. And, you know, it just is given different names. Back then it was pimping and everybody wanted to be a pimp and all of this stuff. And we glorified that lifestyle. And now we see like, okay, now I'm teaching the kids, no, actually that's trafficking. You know, I have them draw out what a pimp looks like. And their idea of what that is completely different from what trafficking is, and having them combine that.
Well, from the map that you showed a few moments ago, it appears that what you don't think about, when we think about not the victims, but the lower level used to be pimps and things like that it appears that one of the things that fuels this whole thing, this looks like it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and I assume you're going to get into, with anything like that, the main goal is to help the young person or any person. And then I suppose from the court standpoint, how easy or how hard, I guess is what I should say, is it to get to the people at the top? Probably look lily white and wonderful and cause a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and that's why like a lot of the survivors I talk to, the person that's pulling the strings is somebody who you never would think, right? You would think this person is a great person, but you don't know. And that's why they're afraid to come out, because everybody loves that person. But that's a common, you know, even in domestic violence, it's a common tactic is to be, you know, likable on the outside, but then, you know, it's that change of behavior.
Convincing.
Yes. Yep, and that's also how they recruit a lot. I don't know if anybody here knows Andrew Tate. He was this big internet personality that really, you know, pushed a lot of objectification of women, and he just got in trouble for human trafficking. But if people were identifying, if they were educated on what trafficking looks like, they would have known that he already told on himself, that he already said he was trafficking said people through the internet. And so, yeah, it's hard for a lot of them to come out because they're like, well, they're friends with cops. They're, you know, and then there's also a lot of empathy that the survivors have. Well, he has kids and I don't want them to be, you know, raised without a father or a mother, things like that. That's some of the things that we've heard, and it's just like, wow, like you don't realize what this person put you through. But yeah, so the more people educated, the better we see cases identified via this what's the word I'm looking for? It's like a parallel. I'll figure it out later. It's starting to wear off. Oh, I still got some. So we're going to watch a video on a survivor here from Indiana. I have never met her. I don't know her full story. I do know that when she was learning about trafficking in a college class is when she first understood that she was trafficked. So I'll just preface it with that. She does a lot of work at the federal level now to help, you know, stop the demand, things like that. But we'll get into her story.
Active in high school. I was involved in the band, I was involved in sports, I was very active with my friends. So on the outside looking in, even if I had some things going on at home and I had some past...
Actually, we skipped over the first video. You could kind of hear like she had some past troubles, but her life was, you know, nice on the outside. And we'll get more into her story, but just kind of think about those things as you're hearing her story.
I met her down at the mall, and you know, she ended up taking me shopping, and she was just like, "Oh, that's a really cute shirt. You would look really good in that color." And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of expensive." You know, I was a goodwill kid. You know, I wanted to get the most bang for my buck. To go to a mall to buy something was just kind of outside of my realm of reality. And she's like, "No, I got it. Don't even worry about it, girl." And I was like, "Oh, this is kind of cool." And then later we ended up going and getting, you know, pedicures. And I had never had a pedicure done before, and I was like, this is really cool, and she's so much fun. And that was just kind of the start of our friendship. And, you know, looking back, I was absolutely being isolated from any other support system. They became my entire world. And again, I think sometimes we have this misperception because of different things in the media that this happens really quickly. This was almost a 6-month investment into my life. And so, you know, no one questioned it for 6 months.
Yeah, so just looking at the early parts of her story, and we'll hear more about it, we can see isolation begins. For somebody like me who works in this field that tries to get people out of trafficking situations, it's hard to compete with that. With the limited resources that the YMCA's Youth Service Bureau or any other social service agency, we're not able to match that amount of attention. We don't have enough time in the day because we have multiple clients, right? But I can't buy a kid a dress and say, that looks really nice on you. You should, you know, buy them whatever at the mall. We're competing with that. And so if we get more people educated on this, we get more people aware that can help when they're ready to seek out help. But that isolation piece is key for trafficking. Yeah, it's kind of the love bombing was the word that I think was the new type of thing that was being said. But yeah, she was being love bombed. She was being isolated from any of her other people because these people were her world. She's never received that type of attention. Just told her, I love the way you do it. It's those little things, right, that people notice about us that really stand out. And when we have somebody who notices that, just noticing you, it's a huge deal. The thing is we need to get to the kids before the traffickers can and notice those little things about them. Be able to give them that individual attention. That's what we try to do at our organization. So, which populations in Indiana are particularly vulnerable to trafficking? So, we have runaway homeless youth. A lot of times when they run away from home, there's a reason. It's not always something that seems so bad. It could be something as simple as a fight. But that's why, you know, organizations like Safe Place are involved so that we can help try to identify what services can be put in place to alleviate that. But runaway and homeless youth is a huge one. There's a lot of federal funding behind it. There's a lot of policy behind it in order to help people who are being in those situations. People in poverty, like if you look back into the video where she was supposed to do anything? Oh, I don't know. You were giving me eyes. I was like, I was like, something on my face? But people in poverty, she said, I'm a goodwill kid. I wanted the most bang for my buck. And then she meets these people who's not even a problem. We'll give you whatever you want. The street money versus what organizations can do and what you get from going on the right path, it's a lot more slow, right? When you're used to that instant gratification that comes from social media, that comes from being on the streets, as soon as you make a deal, you're making money, that dopamine rush is what they're used to. And we have to train them out of that because you have to go to a job interview. Then you have to wait multiple weeks for them to call you back. But then you have to call and check on your application. And maybe they're not as nice to you when you call. Those are some of the things that people in poverty that get into that industry, it's hard to retrain that thinking. System involvement. One of the recent statistics around trafficking is that a lot of trafficking survivors have been involved with the DCS system 3 times before we see that we've identified their case as trafficking.
Department of Children's Services.
Thank you. Yep. Or CPS, some people call it CPS. Abuse, neglect, substance abuse, untreated mental health issues, LGBTQ plus youth. A lot of them are a huge population that I work with, and a huge population for sex trafficking. Immigrant and migrant youth. These are the kids that are afraid to speak out because they don't want to get deported. They don't want to be sent back. They don't want their family to be deported. Refugee and asylum-seeking youth. So yeah, again, they don't know the law of the land. They don't know what's out there to help them. They don't know that people are out here wanting to help them. So they're the most vulnerable. And then you have traffickers who have all this access to resources, and they can provide that right on the spot.
Kevin, Reed came under that that's like 1 second.
Yes.
This whole series is built on reducing stigma. And there is not one of those categories that doesn't involve trauma. And you're going to hear that word over and over and over in this series because it's not a thread, it's a tapestry. And this is a perfect example for us of what that looks like.
Yeah.
And the people that we're getting to know in our interactions with community neighbors. Thanks for holding.
Yeah, no, and to that point, I mean, again, I talked a little bit about that dopamine rush, that instant gratification. Another thing that they do is like when trauma is unexpected and consistently unexpected, there's a lot of research around what that does to the human brain, especially while it's developing. You have to do a lot of retraining because their brain is rewired to survive on the streets in a specific environment. We create, like, they're building a defense mechanism to survive in a environment that doesn't necessarily translate into the world that we know, how to be successful. I know just a little bit about me. I came here from Hawaii. The rules of the streets over there versus here and being in the professional world are a lot different. I had to change certain things like making eye contact. Where I'm from, that's a huge deal. Like, you can't make eye contact with somebody or that means you want to fight. And so I would not make eye contact with people thinking I'm being respectful, and they're like, oh, this guy's not trustworthy. So I had to retrain myself. But again, these are simple, unspoken rules that we don't necessarily know about. And I think it's great that you guys are having a series to educate people more on what these populations go through because, yeah, they all coincide with each other. They're comorbid. There's a lot of things that you'll see, and it is a tapestry. So thank you for saying that.
Even on your vulnerable youth populations, though, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was a teenager, you know, even just anybody like telling you your hair was pretty or you were a good actress or you were a good singer. I mean, you're so vulnerable to compliments, I think.
Yes.
At that age, even if a lot of your other stuff is pretty normal. So there's that age range that I think is just vulnerable because of the age they are.
Yep. And so when I give the presentations in school with kids, I have them tap their forehead because, you know, you can't tell kids anything because they know everything, right? Especially teens. I have them tap their forehead because that's where the prefrontal cortex is. That's where that governs your executive decision making. You don't have that yet. In some presentations, I didn't even have that fully developed yet. So I was like, you're prone to making bad decisions. But again, traffickers know they have their niche age populations that they can market to that gets them the most bang for their buck. So yeah, there is so much to that, just even brain chemistry and things like that. It's a ritualistic industry that has been going on for thousands of years, that they have that understanding of how to buy and sell people.
And then I was doing French homework. And my mom came home and she was making fun of the way I was pronouncing some of my words, and I got entirely frustrated. And I called my friend and I was crying. And I was like, I just can't deal with this. Like, I'm trying to do my homework and my mom is making fun of me and she's drunk and I don't know what to do. And she's like, just pack up some stuff and just come over here. Just come stay with us. I'll make sure you get to school, you know, you can have your sister come over and hang out, like, just don't worry about it no more. And in my 16-year-old brain, I was like, thank you. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to get out of the mess that I thought I was living in. And so I said yes, and I packed up my stuff, and I snuck out, and I ran away for the first time. And so I got to her house, we sat down and had dinner like we had done a dozen times before. And then I was asked a question that changed my entire life. I was asked would I want to join their escort service. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand what's going on. They're talking about that they actually run an escort service. And the stepfather was actually the ringleader of this escort service. And the mom and the daughter both worked for them. And, you know, they wanted to give me a really great opportunity to join and make some money. And so as I'm trying to kind of figure out what this all means, they can obviously see panic on my face. And my friend is trying to tell me how great this is, and girl, it has nothing to do with sex. Sex isn't even involved in this. You just get to go on dates and make lots of money. And then, you know, her stepfather brought in, you want to save up money for college, right? Well, yeah, of course I do. This is a great way to do that. You can make money really quickly. And they were, again, it was such a normalized conversation, literally as we're eating dinner at the kitchen table. And I remember at one point looking out their kitchen window and thinking, I'm in a completely different world and I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I very simply said, I really don't want to be part of this. And they kind of looked at each other and they're like, that's fine, we're here for you, we're, you know, whatever you need, let us know. But if you change your mind, let me know. And then I continued eating my spaghetti and going on with dinner, thinking that was going to be the end of that conversation.
Yeah, so that normalization of that process was just like they're having spaghetti and it's, you know, you just proposition somebody to be a part of your, you know, escorting service. And it's like a form of gaslighting because everybody else is like, oh, it's normal, you know, and it kind of makes you feel crazy if you were in her situation to be like, I don't know why I would have a problem. Everybody else seems fine. I came here running away to them. You are not the person in power in that situation. So that grooming happened way before she was ever propositioned, though. When we went through her process and her story, they were already grooming her. She didn't know she was being entrapped in this world before she even asked. And that's actually very common for sex trafficking. It may be a year before somebody is propositioned of how the grooming process happens. So it'll be a year of the grooming and the love bombing and the constant, you know, persuasion, things like that, until they actually ask of anything. And so a lot of people think trafficking happens fairly quickly. Get in my van, I'm taking you, and you're gonna be shipped off to somewhere else. The truth is like, if you're a trafficker here, you would not want to move your business out to a different country because you make more money here. Actually, a lot of times what happens is like, America is a destination country, is what it's called through the trafficking lingo. It's a destination country. So more people are more apt to be kidnapped in other places and brought here because of the mass commerce and the industry is booming here for the sex trafficking industry. So it was an intentional effort to identify potential victims and gain their trust. That's what grooming is. When I say grooming, it's intentional. It was thought up. Those things that they did, the early identification, that was all a part of a plan. So signs of grooming could be gift-giving, favors to a particular youth/family, power imbalance. It's secretive, breaks the rules for special occasions, and that special occasion could be tied to when that person is being victimized, creating occasion to be alone with the youth, promise of a better life, things like that. Okay, so what connection might the trafficker have with the person? So if you had to guess, who do you think is in that 36% out of those categories on the side? We got strangers, boyfriends, immediate family, employers, and then family friends. Boyfriends, immediate family, family friends. Okay. Yeah, so what we see is, 36% is immediate family. So that was done, that research was done at Covenant House in New York. Is actually a shelter for people who are trafficking survivors. And they asked, who was your trafficker? A lot of familial trafficking happens. And a lot of familial trafficking happens in rural areas, actually, because it's easier to isolate that person when your population is so spread out. And it's hard to get to one place or the other. Fort Wayne's one of the places that struggles with transportation. You're gonna have to stay in this area for a while if you don't have any connections outside. So yeah, that one's, and 9% are strangers. So it's not so much stranger danger anymore. It's understanding what healthy relationships look like. And that's kind of what we do with the kids when we do that presentation. We talk about healthy relationships. And I don't preach to them because again, teenagers know everything. But I have them identify it and I challenge them a little. And it's actually really fun. It's weird talking about trafficking and having fun. So yeah, why didn't you just leave? So we'll watch that video real quick. I know we're running low on time. We're actually over. Okay.
So at this point of kind of my story, a lot of people ask me, why didn't you just leave? There was something inside of you that obviously was triggering that this was a bad situation, and why didn't you just go? And that's a great question that I want to kind of try to give an answer to. One, I was 16. So I didn't even have the ability to make really good rational decisions. I felt like this was my choice because I had made a choice to have a friend that led me to this decision. I had chose to run away. I had chose to not leave immediately that night. And I think because of my past abuse, I just felt like this was my life. These were the cards that I was dealt, and I didn't have any other options, and I had to just suck it up and live with it. Plus, all the people that were around this issue and these experiences, I didn't know who I could trust. Could I really trust police because there were police around this issue? Could I really trust an adult because there were obviously adults that were buying us? I didn't know if there was anyone that I could turn to that wasn't involved in this, so I didn't feel like I could trust anybody. And then there was lots of violence that we witnessed and experienced. And it was very inconsistent violence. Sometimes I would do something wrong, and then one of the other girls would get beat for it. Maybe they would do something right, and I was like, oh, good for you, and then I would get beat for it. And so there was this level of violence that we never quite understood what was going on. There was always lots of threats. There was weapons around. These guys were obviously pretty dangerous. I remember one girl had said something to Dante, and they took her out on the street, and they just were jumping on her and kicking her, and then she disappeared. I don't know what happened to her. Maybe they took her to the emergency room. Maybe she ended up dead. I don't know. But that was enough in my 16-year-old brain to realize I had no other option than to just go ahead and keep doing what I was doing.
Okay, so we'll run quickly through some of the red flags. So red flags of somebody potentially being trafficked. If somebody's a chronic truant, runaway, or a homeless youth, so that's our bread and butter population. We're the Status Offender Court Alternative Program. We have kids who are truant, who run away from home, who are homeless, and we see a lot of that. The rule of thumb for this is like if there are 3 or more, you want to ask questions. So we're not asking you guys to be the person that prosecutes them or figures it out, but if you see 3 or more of these things, that can potentially lead you to calling the tip line. So branding, that's a common one, is tattoos or jewelry, things like that. Excessive cash, goods, or services that a youth typically wouldn't afford. If somebody else has control of their ID or if there's inconsistencies in their story, multiple hotel room keys, marbles, poker chips, or cell phones. So I have to break that one down because people are like, marbles and poker chips, what does that have to do with trafficking? So a lot of, how I mentioned before, where the hotels, strip clubs, truck stops to have that synergistic relationship, a lot of the times if you have a front business, the way you get busted and lose that business is by exchanging cash or goods with people. So if a hotel gives you a red marble and a blue marble, that gives you these services. So then you know that you can receive these services. There's no exchanging of cash. You just bought a red and blue marble. So when the police kick in the door and they find, hey, what are you doing? They just see marbles. There's no exchanging of goods or cash. So that's kind of, they have a new type of currency that changes, how they exchange. So that's one of the things. So yeah, marbles and poker chips, if you see that, or if there's a bunch of hotel room keys, that's a huge sign. Lack of knowledge of their whereabouts. So the client that I worked with that was actually here didn't know where she was. And when I assessed her and I was talking to her about like, okay, so do you know what state you're in? Do you know? And there was no cognitive delay. She was pertinent to the time and where we're at, but like didn't know necessarily where she was in the state. And I was like, okay, so we need to start asking some questions. And I asked her about trafficking, and she said that makes a lot of sense, but wasn't ready to come out, and that's fine. I walked her to the library, and then that was the end of it. If there's scripted or restricted communication, so somebody has control over the conversation, they don't necessarily let the other person talk. Controlling adult/partner, and then signs of physical, sexual, or psychological trauma, which is something you guys will probably learn more about in the other presentations that you'll get. Any questions about those?
What's the red flag on the cell phone?
Cell phones, so yeah, they'll have burner phones. So this phone is the one I use to make sure I keep in contact with my trafficker or my pimp. This one is so that I can keep in contact with the clients or, the people that I do conduct business with. They have to constantly get rid of phones because they don't want to be traced by police.
We see in the papers and on the news and everything, especially the under 18 children, which they are, that fall into the god-awful thing. And we see so much about the term bullying.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems like when you've got a vulnerable young person who may be going to a very good school, something like that, that back to these examples you've given before, which are very helpful, it seems like the bullying can very easily lead to this.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It can cause them to feel ostracized or outcasted. Therefore, they find their sense of belonging. Like those questions we asked before that first video, I want to belong somewhere. Well, traffickers make a very real environment where you can belong, and we'll accept you with your mental health issues. We'll accept you, with your sexual orientation or gender identity, things like that. They are able to have that environment, but it comes with a cost. And so with us, it's like we're trying to make that environment, but without, we don't have that aspect to it, right? So it's hard. We got to kind of meet them where they're at. Reporting. So I'll go quickly. So if you call the Department of Child Services or the Child Protective Services and you call the hotline and you are specifically suspecting trafficking, if you say, I suspect human trafficking, they give you to a separate line where they ask more generalized questions around trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, things like that.
I wanted to say real quickly, our front desk person, Laura Hoffman, has inside our cabinet, by the front desk, because we are a designated safe place. So, let's say you're working at community dinner, or you're helping with street outreach on Wednesday, or you've had an experience with someone at the public library. All that information is right there. And that's one of the reasons that we want it to be designated as a safe place, because we do encounter a lot of people from the community. So, if you're concerned that you might not remember that, we have it all at the front desk, and it's very easy to spot because we've got a great poster like that inside the door that has all the information.
And we will be posting this information on our website in the side-by-side area, probably take a couple of days, but there will be, so you can refer back to it and share with other people too.
Yeah, and I can print the individual screens with the red flags, the numbers to call, because after this one is the Indiana Trafficking Hotline, where you can leave the tip line, or you can leave a tip on their tip line. You can also text. You can text help or info to 233-733. It's a 24/7 service, but the most common, if you want to speak to somebody, is the 1-888-3737-888. Real easy number. It's 3 8s surrounded by 2 3 7s and then a 1 in beginning, right? Yeah. You just have to solve for Y, and then you can put in a tip. You can also text 911 now. So if you text 911, you leave very specific words. Don't use simple words. Don't use abbreviations or shorthand text. You can text if maybe you're in front of the trafficker and the person that they're with, and you want to give that information to the police. You can text 911. Just be very descriptive in saying what your concern is, and go from there. Okay.
You see things about there is a signal that children can give behind their back.
to indicate that they are being trafficked. Is that ever really used?
I don't know that. Yeah, so I've heard of, there's like so many different things. So there's like safe words for like what type of pizza to order, what type of drink to order, like an angel shot or something like that. I think we haven't leaned into those because there's a lot of inconsistencies, and I don't know, if there's a national training on it, then I'll do that. But yeah, I've heard of things like that, but I don't necessarily know what those signs would be. And kids are throwing up all types of hand signs now.
My concern, because it's something like this, is that how much of that is because they're wanting to get clicks on,
Yeah.
and have somebody go into their website or
Yep.
something, or their Facebook, and they're actually making money off of these videos.
That's it.
Because a lot of times it'll be the guy walks into the elevator with the young girl, and then the young girl is signaling, and someone's
Yeah.
running around with their phone. And I kind of wondered whether or not they weren't using it as they're making money
Right.
off of it.
Yeah, and that's the reason why we need these presentations in more places, because there's so much misinformation out there online. There's there's like the Save the Children initiative, things like that, that aren't necessarily based in a lot of this information that comes from the state level and the federal level with the legal jargon and all of that. There's a lot of information, like there's a lot of TikToks. Whenever I talk to kids about it, they're always just like, oh yeah, they always say the word white van. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with it. A trafficker would not look like a creepy person that you would identify.
This is marvelous information, and what you people do is outstanding.
Thank you.
Is a program like this, which you're showing to us, which is basically older adults, is this also, do you take this program to schools?
Yep. So just last week, but we don't show them this information because, again, you can't tell kids anything because they know everything. We just talk about the grooming process, build a relationship, and we try to get away from that sensationalized information and kind of dispel some myths, because they're always online and saying, we also have them do social media retraining where it's like, hey, if you guys want to put out a hashtag to draw awareness to this, put this hashtag that's connected to our social media that will then, give them the right information. So yeah, we're in the schools. It's pretty long because we do 7 periods, a whole day. And yeah, sometimes it's all day.
A lot of energy brings.
Yes. Oh yeah. My interns, they were there. They're just like, yeah, that's kind of a lot. And I was like, thank you, because it feels like a lot. But yeah, this is all just other information, and then there's one more video.
When we get a call at the Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline, we have the opportunity to intervene in the lives of children, families, and youth. I've seen this make all the difference in the world for our families, children, and youth. Please, if you see something, say something.
If you suspect a child is being trafficked, it's very important that you do report it to the tip line. I'd rather investigate a tip and it turn out to be nothing than the tip not go reported to authorities. If you make a report on the tip line, you may remain anonymous. Just keep in mind that the information that you provide is all the information that we have at that time.
So go ahead and get your phone out now. I've got an important number that you need to have in your phone. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is a number that everyone needs, because if we come into contact with someone who we think might be a victim of trafficking, we need to do our part to help. The number is 888-3737-888. Again, the number is 888-3737-888. So when I was living in a world of exploitation and feeling like I had absolutely no chance of living beyond that, I really wish that you would have trusted your gut to call. I didn't need you to get involved. I didn't need you to stop and put me in your car. I just needed you to make a phone call, and that's all that we need you to do now, is to make a phone call. When you see a kid in a suspicious situation that's maybe in the wrong place at the wrong time, something that just makes you feel funny, you don't even have to know for certain that what you're seeing is really true. You just have to make a phone call, because I really wish that someone had done that for me.
Okay, that's pretty much it. Any questions? Yeah.
In your organization, in the state of Indiana, and I think it was so good that you pointed out that we're doing something that many other states are not doing in terms of the youth and the under 18 population and things like this. When these, with your work and other people's work, once these get to a court in the state of Indiana, just out of curiosity, because that becomes a deterrent to some degree too. What is any percentages on the rate of the assholes, pardon my expression, who do this? How are they convicted? Does it?
Yeah, for one, it's really hard to get that force, fraud, and coercion piece, that means piece of the AMP model to be there. And then you run the risk of potentially re-victimizing your survivor because they have to be put through their trauma again and face the person that did all of the trauma. So it's a huge deal, and I don't know the direct percentage, but it is very rare like that, you get somebody to stick out through a whole case. I mean, we saw with, I forget her name, I think it was Breonna Brown. It was a huge case where, she was under the age of 18. She was trafficked, but she killed one of the Johns or one of the people who were patronizing her services, and she was criminalized. And that sent a message to so many other people that are in those similar situations that like, well, yeah, if you try to do anything to get out of your situation, this is what'll happen. So yeah, we also have a video of a trafficking survivor that we worked with, and she kind of describes her experience and just how hard it is to get out of that. And I've talked to, people who were trafficked that were registered nurses, completed 4 years of college and still were in those situations. But the pull and the power dynamic is just so large that it's hard to get them out of that situation. So yeah, it is a huge deal if you get somebody to make it to have that case and put it against that person who is the one who did it.
So is your primary goal to help that victim break away from this and be rehabilitated rather than trying to go to court and do that sort of?
Yeah, so for me, it's identification. So a lot like the street outreach that you guys may do. I identify and then I refer on to other places that specialize in that.
Help that person recover.
Yep. And so a lot of the people who are trafficked, we just give them a place to be, and we're that sense of belonging. So they can get into our other programs. Like we have one girl from Nicaragua that was trafficked by her parent, and she finally got out of the situation from the person who she actually ended up having a baby with. And she just comes to our groups where we just read, basic English stuff and try to, get her. It's not about teaching English, but it's about giving her a sense of belonging. Like, hey, there's people out there that care for you and have your best interest in mind. But again, we would refer on to a place that would specialize in either whether it's victims assistance for the legal piece, talking about a no contact order, things like that. And then the YWCA for the constant case management, making sure you're getting your mental health needs from your PTSD figured out, and advocating for them to get that stuff paid for under the fact that they in fact do have PTSD, because believe it or not, a lot of times trafficking survivors don't get diagnosed with PTSD when that is very much severe PTSD. So we have great people that we partner with, but it's really about building that village for them, right? Because it takes a village. But we're also just that piece of like, whatever piece you want from it, we'll give you a Y pass where you can, find some respite, hang out, just find a place where you feel safe. That's what we kind of do. And then we do the community education piece.
So with all the resources you had listed up there, if we have somebody at community dinner or something that we're thinking, ooh, that kind of hits a lot of it, what's the first thing we need to do?
Probably call the human trafficking hotline. If they're a child, it depends on their age, but you guys can call our 24/7 crisis line, and we can walk through the steps of what that looks like. So whether it be the human trafficking hotline, if they're under the age of 18, then call the Department of Child Services and say, I suspect trafficking, and then getting them identified with other services in the area. Yeah.
Do you have many young people who get sort of trafficked because of drugs? Somebody provides them drugs and the threat of withdrawal?
I had one. I don't work directly with a lot of trafficking survivors, but the few that I have worked with, I think only one has been hooked on like hard drugs. She actually had to fake a seizure to get away from her traffickers. She was pregnant, and she went to the ER, cut off her information to the trafficker, and then ran away to a safe place site with a yellow and black safe place sign, and then got help through that. But no, actually, from the ones that I talked to, a lot of them weren't. They were like just wanting to move on with their life. They really didn't want to talk about it too much, and they didn't. Maybe when they were being trafficked, maybe that was the case, but yeah.
Is there the flip side of calling and then it not being the case? Like with DCS or something, and then that, mother and child or whatever that family is?
Yeah.
Being in the eyes of DCS at that point, is there a flip side to that?
Yeah, there's always a flip side to calling DCS, right? But in the video, the police officer was like, I'd rather investigate a tip and it be nothing than not have the tip reported at all.
We would, but what about that family unit?
Yeah, that's the risk we always run. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you can call with them. And you just, I had your best interest in mind. I really just wanted to make sure things were okay. And if you're ever struggling or kind of, just going back and forth and like, there's just something weird about this case, you can always call us and we can try to figure out, like, just look at your, yep.
Karen used the term gaslighting.
Yes.
And some of us are more familiar with that than others.
Yes.
Can you give us a brief description of what that is?
Yes. So gaslighting is when you do a bunch of actions that cause somebody to, them to basically react to something, but then you basically deny the fact that you did said action. And so you put them in an environment of, this is what has been going on, but then you act like nothing is going on. So it's common more in like domestic violence relationships where it's like, I don't know why you're acting like I beat you. I just talk bad about you all the time. Or yeah, so it's just a form of manipulation. It's more of a manipulation tactic. I don't know if anybody else has a better definition.
Question their own
Yes.
assessment of the situation.
Yep.
Or watch the film Gaslight.
Yeah, watch that.
Yeah.
Really good idea.
Shaming.
Yes.
That's another thread that
Shaming.
runs through so much of this. And as people of faith, we must be responsible for caring for people who have been made to feel that they are less than worthy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such an important piece when walking alongside our neighbors, our families, our congregants, and the professionals, our community partners, because shame has no room in our house.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Yeah. That's it.
May I ask you to repeat the number again that you would call
Yeah.
if you feel the need to?
Yeah. So it's 888-3737-888. Yep.
Are you finding then that it's harder to go after the traffickers, that you're getting better results with educating the communities to help the kids not get themselves into those situations? Is that what, we're finding, that if we educate the youth, if we educate us to look for things to keep them out of it, that we have a better success rate of maybe putting a stop to it, or then going after the actual criminals of the traffickers?
Right.
What research and stuff is finding over the years?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of different committees under the Indiana Trafficking Victims Assistance Program. So one of the things is destigmatization, and then there is the demand subcommittee. So the demand is the thing that we try to attack when I'm giving that presentation to youth, of talking about objectifying people sexually and talking about, well, what is rape culture and why is this normalized in society, so that those messages aren't put on people that says, oh, I guess I belong in this. Because you can arrest as many people as possible, but as long as there is a demand, there will always be somebody who will want to supply. So the information and arming people with that awareness of what they're doing, and then even, you know, helping, like talking to the traffickers about some of the things that they're doing, you know, letting them know that we know what this is, helps take away that demand and helps keep people out of those industries, because if we can attack the demand, then they lose all credibility. There's no reason to supply.
They lose their power.
Yes, exactly.
We absolutely want to thank Cameron for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
For all the amazing work that you do.
Thank you.
We try to keep our families and our individuals and those people who are vulnerable as safe as possible.
Mm-hmm.
We are grateful. And before we close up, I did want to say, in every single one of our series, we're going to be talking about challenging topics. All of us have layers. All of us have experienced trauma in life to one degree or another. And sometimes these conversations can elicit responses in us that are painful or troubling or scary or other. And we don't ever want you to feel that when you leave here that you're carrying a burden that is hurtful to you. And we don't want you to feel alone. So you can always call us, and if you don't feel comfortable calling us, we have numbers here of hotlines that are available for different purposes. One, we will always have the 988 cards out here for suicide risk for you or someone else that you know is contemplating taking one's own life. And that's an easy number now, but also the lookup hotline or the website that has a variety of people to speak with or to go to for certain kinds of emotional needs to feel like you're safe in your own well-being. And don't ever hesitate to take one or two or three and have one on hand if you want to share with another, or just if you yourself have been through challenging life circumstances that you want to have this handy in case you feel threatened. Because your mental health matters to us.
Two quick things. If you have a moment left in you, and you need an energy drink, there may be a drop or two left. We have some questions on your chair. This is the first session of a 6-week session on discussions, and we are hoping that you'll take a moment to answer a few questions, and then you can just fold this up and leave it on that table, and we'll grab it later. Also, not only do we want to thank Cameron for the information he shared today, part of the Youth Service Bureau, they do other things besides this particular topic, and really great work. And just so you know, Trinity English is recently a financial supporter of the Youth Service Bureau, and we wanted you to understand more about what they do and get to know the two-way relationship between us and them, so that hopefully we'll see more of Cameron and his colleagues and different programs, and we will support them in the ways that we can support them. So, yes, ma'am?
The Service Bureau is under
It's under the YMCA.
It's under the Y.
Yeah, so there's two. So we have the YMCA of the United States, and then the Indiana Youth Service Association, which makes us the YMCA's Youth Service Bureau. So yeah, it's a long name, but.
Any last thoughts from you for us?
No. Oh yeah. So one thing is just thank you guys so much for your time. Also, yeah, you're spot on with that. I talk about this topic because I've been doing this presentation for 5 years now. Been working in the field that I'm kind of. It's not that I'm numb to it, but I can speak about this without realizing the actual like trauma that goes into this, and I've been working in it for a long time. But by all means, this is a very serious issue, and if you do need some time or anything like that, I would take your advice. Also, we're highlighting Trinity English Lutheran in our upcoming fundraiser called Fort Wayne Sings. And so since you guys are a huge financial supporter of us, we will be highlighting you guys there. So yes.